I do now? When I finished my term as dean, I'd been there for 7 years and I was finished. That was the longest, my father puts that down in history as the longest job I've ever held in my life. I was bored at year 5, and at year 7 I was done. And so I was going to take a sabbatical. But at that time we had a new government, and it happened that the Minister of Energy had been someone that I had sat on the board of the Economic Development Agency with. And they were looking for somebody to write policy documents around energy, because there were, at that time, the Climate Change Action Plan had just come into effect, and they needed somebody to start to do an analysis of the assets in New Brunswick. And they needed somebody who not only understood the social side of the house, but could also do the business analysis. And so he asked me if I would be interested in an appointment with government. Now, for me, at that time, I was a full tenured prof, so I had no intentions of quitting, because A, the government pension wasn't as good, and, you know, governments are in and then they're out. But we did come to a secondment agreement for 3 years, and I worked with that particular government, which was a Liberal government, and then in October of last year, of course, the government changed and the Conservative government came in. So my secondment was up in January. They asked me if I would stay on for a longer period of time. UNB, on the other hand, was not as interested in that, so they did extend it for 1 year. So July 1 will be the start of my transition back into the university. But in the 3.5 years that I've been there so far, we've worked on, there's one here if you want. Oh, and there's one back there. I worked on a lot of projects, some of them that never saw the light of day. So if you're a person who's easily frustrated, then government is probably not necessarily the place that you want to be, because you can do a lot of work that then never sees the light of day. It just depends on the political environment of the day, you know, or the attitude of the public at the time. But it is interesting work. It's interesting to me that a lot of the bureaucrats in government, when I got there, would say to me, oh, I'm really sorry. So, you know, you'd work for 3 weeks, night and day on a document, you'd have it done, and then they'd decide not to release it. And then everybody would apologize. For me, coming from an academic side of things, it was no different than writing a paper that I thought was great, sending it to a journal, and having it come back to say it was the worst thing that they'd ever read in their life, right? So in some instances, I think academics are a little better positioned than the bureaucrats in terms of creating those kinds of documents and not being frustrated. But the one thing that I can say that came out of my experience with government is, first of all, I still got a chance to work on a lot of collaborative projects. A lot of collaborative projects with government, with other governments, other jurisdictions. You belong to a lot of multi-jurisdictional committees and organizations, so you get to meet a lot of people from other places. But also with academic institutions and also with the private sector, because for most government departments, they require those kinds of partnerships. That's another thing from an academic perspective that you can bring to the table for a job in government, is if you've done, and I know a lot of university programs now are introducing the requirement for community work. That kind of thing on a resume is really quite attractive when governments are hiring, because they want to see if people can form these relationships. Governments are really getting out of the business of leading. They're getting more into the business of what I would call creating a supportive environment for things to happen. So I have two slides that talk about benefits, and one of the questions I got when I sent my slides to say, is this what you're looking for, was, are you going to talk about the downsides? And of course I am, but one of the things that you learn first thing in government is that everything that you do, including your notebooks that you write in and your message pads that you doodle on, are subject to the Right to Information Act, which means somebody can ask for them and then they're a public document. And so you learn quickly what you put in writing and what you don't. And so consequently, we're only going to see the benefits on the slides, but I will talk to you a little bit about some of the downsides. So I think from an academic perspective, what academics bring to government is that they bring good research skills that are more developed than if it's somebody that just comes in with an undergraduate degree that's completely coursework based. I think somebody who comes in from a grad program brings a much different perspective on how to do research, more resourceful, more access, a little wider network. They bring a more analytical style to things. What often happens and what governments are concerned about sometimes within departments, which is why I know the province of New Brunswick right now has got a movement going through the HR department that's asking people to go for stretch goals and to go for cross assignments. So departments are switching people and sharing people, and they really do encourage people not to stay in departments for too long. So they not only shuffle cabinet, but they shuffle internal departments as well. And part of that is because when you work in a department, it's very easy to develop a very narrow focus. So right now I'm in the Department of Energy. We just acquired a director from the Department of the Environment who's charged with a special project on shale gas. And although her focus, she's a biologist, is very much on the environmental perspective, they sent her over to our department so that she can understand where shale gas fits into the overall energy environment. So it's, you know, gas is not the only energy source out there, and she can understand where it fits into the portfolio for New Brunswick. Writing skills are really important. A lot of work that's done by government is written. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're a policy wonk, as they call them, where you're writing, analyzing policy and writing new policy documents. If you are working on the legislative files, you have to write memorandums to executive council. So whenever you hear a minister get up in the House and they put forward some kind of amendment to an act or a change to legislation or a change to fees, all of those start with a document that provides background and justification. So it's like writing a mini proposal for your thesis that goes to cabinet, and it's a document that the minister will present and then defend to his cabinet colleagues to get them on side to pass this in the House. And often academics can bring a focused expertise that is not available within government. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some career opportunities at the end, but that focused expertise is often very useful. I think there is a chair if you don't want to stand. I didn't think so. You didn't look too comfortable in your position there. But we don't have an expertise in everything. And so very often governments will go look for somebody who has a very specific piece of expert knowledge. So government couldn't have enough bureaucrats to know everything, and so very often they will go and they will hire people to come in and work on a project that have a very specific knowledge. So for example, Yves Gagnon from the University of Moncton has got a very specific focus, research focus on wind. Well, we have a number of bureaucrats who have knowledge about wind energy and renewable energies, but not in the depth that he has. And so very often they'll bring him in to either evaluate a proposal, evaluate a policy, or in fact write a policy if they need it done. I think academics also bring a much different perspective to the job. They're a bit more objective, so they're not really, especially if you come in on a project basis, you feel less tied to the particular government of the day that you're doing the work for, and very often that's very attractive to government as they're trying to get some of their policies evaluated. The one thing that I learned early in my career is that unless you are a hardcore political animal, then I would play my political cards close to my chest. It's very easy to get, and this is one of the downfalls of going to government, it's very easy to be tagged with one color or the other, in particular in a province the size of New Brunswick, but really regardless. So I know that my colleagues from the university, when I did go to government, automatically assumed that, oh, she must be Liberal because I was appointed to a position during a Liberal government. When in fact it had nothing to do with my political stripes. It just happened that I worked on a number of community projects with somebody who got elected and then was appointed as Minister of Energy at the time. And they moved the department to St. John. So there were a comedy of errors, I guess, that created an opportunity. But then so you could have talked to some of my colleagues at the time, they would have said, oh, yes, absolutely, she's a Liberal. Well, you could talk to some of my colleagues in government who will tell you that I'm a Conservative, because when the government changed, although a number of people left, I wasn't one of them, and in fact they tried to extend me, and it was the university who drew the line in the sand and said, no, it can only be for 12 months. And I've never had a job where picking one political party over the other has been a smart thing to do, because I needed money, right? I needed government money. And so if you do decide to publicly support one side or the other, know that that limits your abilities in a lot of instances. And it's not that anybody's going to be determinedly malicious, but there's an element of trust. And so when you're hired in government, there has to be some element of trust that what you're going to do is in the best interest of the public good and the government of the day, as opposed to any other focus that you would have. The other perspectives that you bring are that you're informed, okay, often much more widely read, for example, than the people who may or may not be in a department. So I would say before I went to government, I was well informed from a public perspective. I read the newspaper, typically 2 or 3 from cover to cover, especially when I was the dean at the university. Now, what do? I read the clippings every day. So if it's not energy, I don't know what happened. And so I rely on my husband when I get home to tell me if I need to know anything, so that I can at least speak intelligently at some kind of social event that day. Right? Because, if it's not hockey or it's not energy, I probably didn't know about it. And the only reason I know about hockey is because I bill it for the Sea Dogs and do their post-secondary education, and our media guy happens to be a big hockey fan, so he usually sticks the hockey clippings in with our energy clippings. But as funny as that sounds, that really is how the bureaucracy often works, because you don't necessarily have time to read everything, especially if there's stuff that's going to the legislature. So if you're in the middle of a policy change or getting ready to change the Electricity Act, everybody's very focused. And so if it doesn't have anything to do with energy, you don't care, right? So, during the refurbishment of Point Lepreau, the people who are on the nuclear file, if it didn't have anything to do with the nuclear disaster in Japan, they didn't care. Right? They didn't want to know anything else about electricity. All they wanted to know was what happened in nuclear. And so those were the only clippings that they got. And so from an academic perspective, we often bring a much broader, more informed perspective, and we don't have the government or the political context. And that's another thing from an academic perspective that's really valuable to government, is that you come as John Q. Public, and you look at something and say, as a citizen, this is what I think. And you're not really colored by having worked in the department. You know yourself, right? When you get that rejection letter from the editor of a journal, you just want to shake them and ask them, what they're thinking. Well, that's what a bureaucrat who just spent 17 months writing a policy wants to say when somebody says they don't like it, right?